Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. And I've been experimenting with a really exciting new product and I want to share it with you. These are the new Optimist inks. They're made by Federal out of St. Louis, Missouri. And they've only been on the market for under a year. And I just happened onto them because of their Instagram video. And I ordered a set right away. And their way of thinking about how to use them is to draw with them and paint with them, etc. But as the more broad surface designer that I am, I've been thinking of all kinds of other ways to use them. And so this is the first of a series of videos that will explore those. But let me talk about the inks for a minute. So there are new pigments being invented all the time. And these are based on pigments that are really pure in terms of not having an overtone that's either cool or warm. So literally what I've got is the three primaries, magenta, cyan, and yellow. But they are so straightforward in their color that I can mix an entire color wheel, as you'll see when I get to the demo here, and the colors remain pure and bright because there aren't those overtones that can get in the way. Now, one of the things I love about these that makes them different from other pigments or coloring agents, I guess I should say, is that the pigments are mixed into a shellac base. And shellac is actually derived from bugs, and it's harvested sustainably, so we don't need to worry about that being an issue. And the thing about having shellac in the recipe is that it makes for these beautiful opportunities to either do opaque colors or translucent glazes, but they have a sheen that you wouldn't get from a plastic-based acrylic product. So that's one thing to really love about them. The next thing that's really cool is that they go on like watercolors, or they can, based on how you're applying them. But once the layer is down, it's stable and it's set. And that means that I can go back and add additional colors or glazes over what I've already put down without having it re-wet the way typical watercolors would. And I can get really nice applications of layers and glazes that I couldn't necessarily get by thinning down acrylic paint. So I'll never stop loving my dyes and my paints, but this introduces a whole range of possibilities where they can be used together. And I've been playing with that too. That'll be in a future video. So what I've got here is the basic set that they sell. They sell several different color sets now, but they sell, this set is the cyan, the yellow, and the magenta, as I said. It comes with a black that's really highly pigmented, so it takes only a teeny amount. Pigment load in these is so great that they stay really intense and colorful and pure, even though you're sometimes thinning them down. How would you do that? Well, you can add their opaque white, and the opaque white literally turns the colors into an opaque version of a watercolor. So that's an exceptional advantage. Then if I want to thin them in order to create the glaze effect, I can add this transparent clear shellac. They call it the colorless shellac medium. I can add that to any of the colors in order to get this entire range, which you'll see when you watch the demo in just a minute here. Because they're shellac, when they dry, they're permanent, as I said, but you can clean them up with water while they're still wet. So I can have a container of water and clean my brush off as I'm working, and that's really great. And I can clean off my palette, and that's really great. But if they dry, they also provide this ink solvent, and you can use that to dissolve any dried ink that might be on your palette or might have dried somewhere else where you want to remove it. I've played with using them on fabric. That'll be another video. I've stamped them. I've done all kinds of cool things with them. But let's get started today with just the intro to how to use them and how I practiced first by painting a color wheel. Okay, let's get started. I'm really excited to experiment with these and to show you some of the ways that I'm using them. And one of the first things I do when I'm playing with a new product is I do my color wheel. This is the color wheel template that I use in order to paint a fairly traditional 12-color color wheel. And I'm shaking up the yellow, and then I'm going to put just a little bit of yellow out there. A little bit goes a long way, and depending on the humidity, it might dry pretty fast on your palette, so plan accordingly for that. You need to mix it up really well, because if you don't, it'll be a little bit too thin and watery. So let's get started on my wheel. Paint yellow into the top spot on the wheel as I am characterizing it. Sometimes we think of that as the number 12 spot. And then I'm going to add some red to the palette. This is actually their primary magenta, and that yellow was their primary yellow. And the other blue I'm using out of this six color set is the primary cyan. So I'm going to just get a teeny little bit of that magenta on my brush and mix this up to make the second color, which is yellow orange. I'm going to work my way around the color wheel. And what I've noticed with these, at least when I'm hand painting shapes like this, if I want it to be a little bit more dense, I can always come back and add another coat. You can do that while it's wet, but you could also do it while it's dry. The next color up is going to be orange. And again, I'm just working with these two primaries. I'm going to scoot that over a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to add a little bit more of the magenta, and that will allow me to mix a true orange. And there's plenty of room on my watercolor paper, so if I want to try the color out before I put it in the wheel, I can make sure it's right. I'm using a small, rather flat brush to fill these shapes, so I can stay inside the lines to the best of my ability, although that's not always one of my fortes. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another layer there. The next color up is red orange. So what I'm really doing is just adding progressively more of the magenta to the yellow, or actually to the mixture that I've already made. And my goal is to be able to see an obvious difference. I've got a set of what I call color constant cards, and those are colors that I usually try to work with in order to make sure I'm coming pretty close to the color that I have in mind. I could get those out, but at this point, I feel pretty confident eyeballing it. Now, it might be looking a little bit shiny there because the reflection from the wet paint surface. So in a minute, when it starts drying, you'll be able to get the full impact. Now I'm going to add just a little bit more magenta to that. You know, magenta, some people think of magenta as red, but in fact, it really leans more toward red violet. And that's because it has cool overtones. The way to balance out those cool overtones is to add a little bit of the orange to it. And that brings it closer into alignment with what we think of as a truer red. Put a little bit more on top of that one. Did I say you could probably go back and do that when it's dry, but I've had pretty good luck adjusting it while it's still wet. Now we're going to introduce the cyan. Sometimes if the paint's been open a while, it seems to dry a little bit. It hasn't seemed to be a problem with clogging at all, but if you're having that kind of an issue, just stick a little pin in the end. Okay, so now what I'm after is a red violet, and that's a balance between red and purple, or red and violet. That's a little bit too violet. That's actually probably perfect for violet. So put a little more of the magenta over here and mix that in so I can keep that color a little bit redder. There we go. Actually, I think it needs just a little bit more red, so I'm going to dip into that and see about mixing it right on the wheel. Okay, now I need a true violet, and let's see again what that is. That's pretty close. We add just a teeny bit more blue. without running the risk of pushing it toward blue-violet. If you don't have a template like this, you can draw one, obviously, but you could also go online. Could very well be that you can find a blank template that will work this way. I like to paint the entire wheel so that I can see the colors in relationship to one another, you know, as opposed to just painting out a strip like what I've got going on the side here. But that's pretty much personal preference. So now I'm going for blue violet. And again, I'm just using these basic 3 very pure primaries. I'm going to turn this around so I don't get my hand in the wet paint. So now I'm moving toward blue, and at this point I'm going to rinse my brush off so I don't have any of that magenta mixed in with the blue, because for the primary blue on the color wheel, what I really want is pretty much straight blue, this straight cyan. Some people might quibble about that a little bit, but it comes pretty close. That one might need a little bit more top coat. These are transparent in the form that they come in. And there is an opaque white that you can add in order to create opaque colors too. I'll show you that in a little bit here. But it also turns them into tints because it's essentially adding white. So right now, I think the answer to getting solid blocks of color, if that's what you're after, would be to double up the layers. So now I'm looking for blue-green. I'm going to pick up some yellow over here and mix it into the cyan. Looks pretty good. Maybe just a little more yellow. That looks pretty. Okay. Realize I'm out of camera. That's a little bit better. Then I need the true green. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to what I had going over here. I did manage to put my hand in that spot on the paper, but c'est la vie. So you could mix the opaque white into these colors one at a time and do an opaque color wheel, and that might be interesting too. And these do work on fabric, but I'm going to save that for another video. Okay, so the last color that we need is yellow-green. And I'm going to go back up here. I think that almost needs a little more yellow in order to suit my taste. Okay. So I can clean my brush with water while I'm working wet like this, and I can clean off this palette with water as long as the paint is still relatively wet. But they also make a solvent that you can use, Federal, that is the company, makes a solvent that you can use if paint like this dries on your palette that makes it a lot easier to remove. So that might be something worth acquiring too. Okay, so there's my color wheel. And I'm pretty satisfied with how all of those colors worked out just by using the 3 primaries here. One thing about these colors is that they're a relatively new pigment apparently, and they're very pure. They don't have overtones like I mentioned before of going either warm or cool. And for that reason, they mix into secondary and tertiary colors that stay nice and bright and also very pure. So that's a real advantage. And you know, just a reminder that when these dry, they're permanent. So unlike watercolor that can be re-wetted and moved around, when these are dry, you can paint glazes and do all kinds of things on top of them. So that's another video down the road too. But right now, I'm pretty pleased with how this is turning out. And I want to do one more little experiment while you're here with me. So here I have a grid that I drew on watercolor paper. And now I'm going to get into mixing the colors and adding the white and the black. And also the clear, the colorless, let's see, they call it the colorless shellac medium, because these are shellac. You can, as I've been saying, you can mix them with water, but one of the qualities that makes them so vibrant when they dry and so shiny is that they do have shellac as the base. Now, I have all of this paint over here, and I'm going to use that up. So what I'm going to do first is mix a little bit of an olive by blending that orange that I had into the yellow green. And then I'm going to paint one of my squares. I'm using a bigger brush. You can work with whatever tool is comfortable for you. I highly recommend this kind of an exploration, just as a way of getting to know the colors and seeing what they do and how they blend. So we'll see if I can do an entire sheet here, just using variations on blue and green. Now I'm going to introduce the white, shake it up really well. And this is their opaque white. So I'm going to mix this into the olivey green. And then let's see, what direction do I want to go so that you can see. I'm going to paint this so you can see right away, get this really beautiful pale version of that color. Because of the addition of the white. I could also add the clear shellac, and that would create a different effect entirely. That would create a really light, well, let's go ahead and do it. So here's the clear shellac. I'll add it to this over here. I'm going to clean my brush so I'm not carrying any of that white opaque paint along for the ride. And I'm going to mix this up. See how thin it gets? A few little glops of the dried paint in there. That doesn't really matter. You see the difference, creating a tint by adding the white and creating another variation on a tint by using the clear shellac. Now let's mix them. So in this block, I'll do the top, the opaque, and then down here, I'll introduce the version with the clear shellac in it. And it starts to bleed in a really beautiful way. So if you're interested in getting, I know it's getting a little bit of a glare, but if you're interested in getting really watery effects, like in landscape sorts of things, this would be a great way to go about doing that or achieving that. Okay, let's see. I'm going to introduce a little bit more blue into this color. So now I've got another version of that pale blue-green. If I introduce a little bit of the red into that, it's going to push it a different direction. So let's see what happens with that. My point in doing this and talking through it is to give you the courage and the inspiration to just start playing with mixing the colors, because you can see here I already have 6 colors, and they're really beautiful colors, and they're all made just from the leftovers on my palette, and they're all quite different from each other. So let's keep going. Now I'm going to add the black. And the black is very, very highly pigmented. So I just need a teeny bit of it or everything on the palette's going to turn black. I'm just going to dip a little bit of the brush, a little bit of the brush in the black, and then bring it over here and mix it into this olivey green that I had going there. Let's see what that looks like. So now really what I'm creating is what we refer to as a chromatic gray. A chromatic gray is a color that you would perceive as gray if you saw it by itself. But when you see it next to other colors, or you see it next to a true chromatic gray, you realize that it has an overtone of color, and that's referred to as a chromatic gray. So I can mix a slightly different one. Let's add a little bit of blue to it. A lighter value of that. Well, it's good to put this right next to, I didn't really plan it, but when I put it right next to the one over here, it's essentially the same color, but you can see what a difference it makes just adding a tiny bit of that, really, really tiny bit of that black to it in order to get the slightly lower intensity is how we'd refer to that, or a duller version, but still a really incredibly beautiful color. Okay, let's see. Let's go down here. I didn't paint this yet. Let's put this in here. This is the white added to the blue-green that I mixed up earlier. And another thing about working this way is it's such a great way to use up the leftover inks. I mean, these are not inexpensive inks. They go a long way. But if you can learn by using up what's left to explore color combinations, you're going to be that much further ahead of the game in your own understanding. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the things that I enjoy most about creating is the learning process. And you can see how now I'm getting this variation in that square, which I'm really liking a lot. So I might keep going that direction. Let's put a little bit more black in here and see what happens. Do you see what I mean about adding very, very small amount of black? That color's sort of close to the one above it, but it isn't exactly the same. Which, if anything, points out how many variations you can get going. Scads of them, I'm sure. Okay, let's see. This isn't dry, that red yet, that magenta combination. So let's bring a little bit of that into this and see what happens. I know I said I was going to stick to green, but I'm easily distracted. Let's see, move these out of the way so I can slide this up. See, so really what I've got here now is another chromatic gray. Because it has some relatively slight, but still some obvious reference to the color that was mixed into it. I'm working in a pretty sketchy way. If you really wanted to, you could tape this all off and it could be a really perfect, nice grid. But I love trying to achieve these watercolory effects. And that's starting to dry a little bit. So add this and see if we can save it. See how it varies from the one I just did. Not too interested in that. I think I'll add white instead. So if I have a goal with doing this, in addition to using up the paint, my goal is to fill this up with, let's see, 4 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 24. Isn't that fabulous to think? 24 colors. Oh, yikes. Oh, well, that's interesting. Let's just go with it. Let's see, best way to approach this. Guess I'll go over here. Now, I will say that if you're big into documentation, this is not a way that you're going to work. Or you may not, you could work this way, but you might not enjoy it, is I guess what I'm saying. Because it's pretty free form. And it isn't as though I can document exactly how I got that color, because that's just not how this whole thing is rolling. Let's see, what do I want to do? I want to put a little more black in there. But I think what you'll find, at least this has been true for me, is that once you work with any particular medium or product, basically, like I work so much with MX dyes, I can predict what certain combinations will look like. I think the same thing would probably be true here, that the more you work with them, the more you'll understand what they'll do. I'm just going to shoot a little yellow. Oh, need my pin. Made the mistake of leaving the lid off of the yellow, which, I mean, it's resolvable, but not ideal. See where we can go with this that'll be different from what we already had. And then I can pull in some of the white in order to blend it in the actual square. Yeah, I'm liking that quite a bit. Okay, maybe just another dab of black. See where that takes us. I have a beautiful evergreen color. I'm going to start playing a little bit and blending right in the squares. And now I'm going to put a little bit of the clear in the center of this square. One thing about them, when they fall over, they don't spill. So I put a little bit of the clear shellac here, the colorless shellac, and now I'm just mixing it right on the paper as a way of getting a layer that's way more sheer than what I had above it. And if I do that again, and I don't add any more color, I'll be able to get something that's even lighter. Okay. We have one row left. And what shall we do next? Let's add a little bit of red. Oop, well, there you go. Best laid plans. And let's add a little bit of white. Not everybody likes these really sort of muddy colors like I've got going here, but I actually really think they add richness to what you're working on. So, we will look at this more in the future, but once I really think you almost have to play around in the way that I'm starting you out here with these, because my goal is to introduce on fabric, using them as stamps, layering them as really sheer layers that build up color over time, but also using them to add hand coloring to collages, because I think they'll be perfect for that. Okay, here's my wild card. You could literally do a sheet like this. I mean, this one's basically the cool colors, but you could certainly use the yellow and the red and have a whole different colorway. I mean, you could do it over and over again. Isn't that one of the great things about versatile products? So there's a lighter version of the violet. And because these are permanent once they dry, I could go back later and overprint these. Well, shoot, I could use all kinds of things on top of this as a background. But I can even add, that's nice. I can add additional Optimist ink on top of what I have here, and it won't affect the layer that's underneath. There now, that's a reduced intensity because of adding the, well, actually, it's a shade from adding the black to it. I was getting ahead of myself. So I think I want to add a little yellow and see what happens as we get toward the end here. Ooh, see? There you go. A little bit of additional color to create a little more drama. You can see how they're not blending, which is great. That's such a great way to get more of a shadowy effect. Okay, I have one left. What's the best thing to do there? Maybe go ahead and add some of the clear shellac, a little more yellow. Let's see where we end up at the end here. Although the other thing you can do is once you've got this in your tray, if it isn't dry and you're finishing up the way I'm finishing up, you can use this for a monoprint, which would mean cutting a piece of paper that would fit in there in the tray and putting it down and rubbing it in order to transfer what's in the plate or the palette onto paper, which just more collage materials, right? Okay. So there is my final test run. And all I can say is these have so much potential and they're really, really fun. And I'm just loving working with them. And I hope you have enjoyed this video. And there will be more to come. So look forward to that, because I sure am. So I hope those brief demonstrations will help get your own ideas flowing and will be inspiration for looking at the ways that you could incorporate these into the work that you're doing. Stick with me, because as we go through the future videos, you'll get even more ideas. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know right now, Jane, I'm not convinced, let me see what else you do, that's all forthcoming. Meanwhile, if you're thinking you'd like to purchase some Optimist inks, make sure you go through the link that's down below so that you can take advantage of the discount that they'll offer on your purchase. So thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you the next time.